Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth pediatric grand round. And I would like to share my screen now. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible, ma'am.
Okay. So, welcome to the fourth pediatric grand rounds of SPS Hospitals Ludhiana. I think this is post-COVID era or after COVID era. So, me and Dr. Vikas, we are pediatric consultants and we are pediatric intensivists here at SPS Hospitals Ludhiana. And we'll be taking you through a journey of space management of, you can say, PIMS, TS, or post-COVID syndrome. So, starting basically, this year has been really confusing. We had fevers, we had COVID fever, we had dengue fever, we had now we are having one more thing, which is after our peak, we had it like another fever, which was attributed to post COVID syndrome. So coming to my first case, which was a diabetic type 1 diabetic mellitus male child who presented to us with fever for 5 days. When he was admitted, his weight was 46 kilos and his blood pressure was normal and he had fever of 101 degree Fahrenheit. Other than that, there was absolutely no problem in the child. And systemic examination was absolutely normal, just that he had hepatomegaly of liver about 2 centimeters. When we did his blood investigations, he was admitted in the evening. It was found that he had high TLC count and neutrophilia, as you can see, a neutrophil count of 82%. And he had platelets on the lower side. So, as our tendency is nowadays, I tested him for enteric fever. We tested him for dengue fever, which was negative. There was no signs of any decay in this child, and I started him on ceftriaxone. So we started him on ceftriaxone, thinking that it is some infectious etiology or enteric fever. But after 48 hours of antibiotics, we saw that the child's fever started spiking, very high fever, and his repeated counts actually showed an increasing trend. His cultures were all negative, dengue was negative, everything was negative. That was the time when Dr. Vikas said that, okay, let's do some inflammatory markers in this child. And when we did a CRP in this child, it was 338 and the ferritin was 290. They were very high. So we went to this child's room and we asked the mother that did he have COVID before? So mothers gave a clear-cut history of loss of smell and taste in the family about a month back. And that's the time it clicked our mind that maybe we are dealing with post-COVID syndrome, and we found the antibody positive. We sent the antibodies in this child and they came out to be positive to the tune of, I think, 83 was his number. So we suspected a case of post-COVID inflammatory syndrome in this PIMS TS in this child, and we started him on IV methylprednisolone 2 milligram per kilo per day. And to our surprise, the fever came down within 48 hours. We did an echo in this child. We did not show any coronary abnormalities. His pro-BNP was absolutely normal. So this is a trend of his investigations, and as you can see, he was discharged on a count of 22,500 with neutrophilia, but he was absolutely afebrile. His CRP showed a downward trend over the period of time as we were giving steroids, and he was completely afebrile. His COVID PCR was negative because we do it for all the patients. Dengue was negative, cultures were sterile. His HbA1c was 6.7. So this child didn't develop any complications, and it was the discharge. And he had high sugars on steroids, so which managed with intravenous insulin. So this was the question here in our mind, in my everybody's mind, that is this PIMS TS? What are we dealing with in this child? I mean, what is happening? So let's first discuss pediatric multi-system inflammatory syndrome temporarily associated with SARS-CoV-2 before we find out more about this case or find out further questions.
I just want to add one thing here. Here in this case, if we can go 2 slides back, can we go 2 slides back? So here you are seeing that this child who came to us on first with the counts of 20,600 with neutrophilia, and then on third we repeated the counts with antibiotics on with all the reports in our hand, culture negative. The counts are still 19,800 with very high CRP of 338. So on third, after finding this, we started him on steroids. And on third steroids, we again repeated the after within 24 hours, his fever subsided. But his sugars were quite haywire. We involved endocrinologist, and he has to put him on insulin infusion to manage his blood sugars. So on sixth, as the child was completely febrile, the mother was asking for discharge. But we told them because insulin is the sugars are quite abnormal, so we want to control the sugars first. And endocrinologist was behind us that the steroids are like we use steroids at 2 mg per kg per dose of methylprednisolone. So he was behind my life. You cut down the steroids, then only the sugars will be normal. So we reduced steroids from 40 mg BD to 30 mg BD. And even after around in the morning dose, he got 40. Evening dose he was 30, and by night around 11 or 12 he started having low grade fever. So mother started saying, no, my child is not well, please don't reduce the steroids, you have told us that we are decreasing steroids. But we insisted, no, we want to see that what is his actual requirement. So we reduced steroids. Morning dose we also gave 30, and by afternoon the child, next day afternoon the child was having high grade fever. So by evening we again started him on we increased the dose to 40 mg. And we repeated the counts next day. The counts were 19,900, but CRP was showing downward trend because we know that CRP takes a bit longer time as compared to the total count. On 9th again, we repeated the steroids again, counts again, because now we want to discharge this patient because the patient was ill, right? So on 9th, the counts were high, but CRP was less as compared to the value which was seen on third. Child was afebrile, taking orally well. His sugars were under control. So we made him put him on oral steroids 40 mg twice a day, and we discharged this patient, keeping this in mind that we don't know till how long we have to give a dose of 2 mg per kg per day. He was a diabetic child. He's prone to get infection. So, and the parents asked, is there any problem that he is on high dose steroids? We told them we tried to reduce it, and you saw the result that he has been in the hospital for 3-4 more days because just we reduced the dose of steroid by 10 grams, 10 milligrams per dose. So what I want to say here is, so there are certain gray areas which nobody knows how long to give steroids at what dose, when to taper them. We got one echo for this child here, but we don't know whether his coronaries will get involved subsequently. As we know in Kawasaki, even if coronary aneurysm is not there and your other criteria of Kawasaki are being fulfilled, then also you have to give them IVIG. So in this patient, we have not given IVIG because he became all right with simple oral steroid. So Mehak will tell us that what these type of cases, when they are seen by the other, when they're seen at other places like in UK, US, what they people are doing, how they are managing these patients. So let's see what's the other published literature tells us about these patients.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Vikas. So we move ahead. This was a very gray area. We didn't know what to do. Anyways, we gave him steroids. We sent him home. So let's discuss PIMS TS first, and then we would go again on these gray areas. So PIMS TS. So this was the time in April when they basically published this paper in Pediatric Intensive Care Society. This was not publication, but this was a news rather, where basically they said that something wrong is being happening. There are some children who are having a features of toxic shock syndrome and Kawasaki disease, blood parameters consistent of severe COVID-19. That means very high inflammatory markers. They are arriving in the ICUs. And what is being seen in these patients is that they have abdominal pain and gastrointestinal symptoms, which is usually not present in a case of Kawasaki disease. Subsequently, they published this paper. This was from South Thames Retrieval Service, London, UK. They calculated a data of about 8 children, and where they found Kawasaki disease-like features and Kawasaki disease shock syndrome or toxic shock syndrome like features. And if you can see in all these patients, the inflammatory markers were really, really high. So, and they called it, there's something called hyperinflammatory shock, which is arriving in our ICUs. So by May, RCPCH, which is the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, they came up with a definition for this criteria, this shock they were seeing, and they named it as pediatric inflammatory multisystemic syndrome temporarily associated with SARS-CoV-2. So what was this? Any child presenting with fever, a very high inflammatory markers and evidence of single or multi-organ dysfunction. It could be kidney that is involved, it could be liver that is involved. So that was the case. And when they saw that they can fulfill partial or full criteria for Kawasaki disease, and they excluded any other microbiological cause. So this was very important. They had all the cultures negative, everything negative, and subsequently but they didn't say anything about the SARS-CoV PCR positive. It can be positive or negative. So then US, the case reports increased. Now travel to, this now basically traveled to the other parts of the world, and in US they called it as MISC, multi-system inflammatory syndrome. So MISC. So what CDC? Anybody knew itself? So multi-system inflammatory syndrome, MISC, which is the CDC guideline. So what they said is they basically individualized the age. So they said less than 21 years, no other alternative causes of diagnosis with inflammatory markers positive, and more than 2 organs involved in this case. And they further made it rigid, saying that either the patient should have COVID exposure to COVID in the last 4 weeks, or he should be antibody positive, that is the serology positive in the last 4 weeks. So that is how they gave the criteria of MISC, and this was accepted by WHO as well. And then WHO also accepted these guidelines, and they further individualized this. And basically what they did is they said that all the children 0 to 19 years of age, and they have fever for more than 3 days. So they gave that the fever should be more than 3 days, and Kawasaki disease like features, myocardial dysfunction, and gastrointestinal problems, related markers of inflammation. Mikasa, can you mute everybody? And no other microbiological cause of inflammation. And difference. Everybody came up with their guidelines. CDC is from US, WHO, and RCPCH. What WHO did was said 0 to 19 years, more than 3 days of fever, and more than 2 systems involved. And there should be basically you should have a SARS-CoV-2 PCR positive or an antibody exposure positive. So coming to the hallmark features of PIMS or MISC, whatever you want to say, is number 1, fever. So persistence of fever for more than 3 days, which is not explained by any other cause. There is no microbiological evidence. In India, of course, dengue should be negative, or any other thing which suggests any other infection should be negative. Number 2 is the Kawasaki-like features. We all know what are Kawasaki-like features, like mucous membrane redness, swelling of hands and feet, conjunctivitis, lymphadenopathy. So they can be some features or all the features. And the third important thing was cardiac dysfunction. So a shocky-like state with signs of hypotension and poor perfusion related to severe myocardial dysfunction. Plus, very important, is laboratory evidence of marked systemic inflammation. That means your inflammatory markers, we all know about inflammatory markers, just 8 months down the line with COVID, CRP, ferritin, LDH, fibrinogen, and D-dimers. The other features of PIMS-TS or MISC they saw were the gastrointestinal symptoms. So they saw that in this Kawasaki disease-like features, there are lots of abdominal pain, vomiting, and diarrhea, which is not a usual case of a Kawasaki. Number 2, they saw neurological manifestations such as neck stiffness, altered mental status, lethargy, even stroke. And respiratory symptoms may or may not be present, and cardiac issues. What all cardiac issues can be present? As I said, myocardial dysfunction, coronary artery dilatation or prominent coronary arteries, arrhythmias. So all this can happen in PIMS-TS. This was a paper by Lokesh Tiwari sir, who was in AIIMS Bihar and AIIMS Patna, and they found a girl with positive inflammatory markers, positive IgG, and she presented with arterial stroke. So this was a paper published in Lancet, and all our adults also seeing lots of stroke coming in post-COVID, probably related to SARS-CoV-2. So we all know about Kawasaki disease, and we all know about toxic shock syndrome. So there's fever, rash, renal impairment, etc. Now, in this slide is very important. Now, this slide basically says what is difference between pre-pandemic Kawasaki disease and PIMS TS or MISC. So how do we know, are we dealing with Kawasaki disease or it is SARS-CoV-2 related Kawasaki disease? So just go through the features. Number one, gastrointestinal symptoms are very, very common in PIMS TS. This is not the case in Kawasaki disease. Cardiac dysfunction and having basically vasoactive drugs, they are more common in PIMS and MISC. So in this case, other than that, as you can see, so shock and cardiac dysfunction is common in PIMS or MISC, which was not there in Kawasaki disease. In Kawasaki disease, you used to see more of coronary abnormalities, but we never had a shocky-like state. And as you can see, the CRP, ferritin, D dimers, and cardiac markers like pro-BNP and TROP-I and thrombocytopenia. So all these inflammatory markers, cardiac markers, and thrombocytopenia, as you can see, they are more common in PIMS TS and very, very less common in Kawasaki disease. But the coronary abnormalities, of course, are more in Kawasaki disease. They are found less in PIMS TS. And even if they are found, many people have seen that they can be cured completely with the steroids. So this was a slide representing how can we differentiate from a pre-pandemic Kawasaki disease to PIMS TS or MISC. Now look at this graph. This is our PIMS TS, and you can see that the vasoactive drugs and the cardiac involvement is more here. Whereas in Kawasaki disease, which is pre-pandemic, there was no such involvement. There was more of mucosal rash and conjunctivitis. So the three cardinal features are Kawasaki disease-like criteria, cardiac dysfunction, vasoactive drugs, gastrointestinal symptoms, and that basically says that this is PIMS TS. And this is a data from intensive care medicine, where they have seen that the SARS-CoV-2 PCR was positive in 45% patients and IgG was positive in 75% patients. But now the latest data is even saying that the IgG is positive to the tune of 98 to 100% in such patients. That means, and PCR is positive in just 10 to 20%. That means IgG, SARS-CoV-2 IgG is very, very important in when you diagnose PIMS TS. Now, why is this happening? So only two mechanisms, but So number one, impaired antigen production and antibody formation. So autoantibodies. So what happens is when you are infected with SARS-CoV-2, after you recover, the autoantibodies start basically damaging your own body and cause the enhancement of the disease. The other proposed mechanism is basically impaired signaling, failed clearance of the virus, and massive cytokine upregulation. So you see at the end of 15-20 days, some patients who were positive with COVID-19, they present with high inflammatory markers, fever, unchecked inflammation, and that is, they also land up in what features are called the PIMS TS or the MISC syndrome. So these are the two main mechanisms which have been proposed for this SARS-CoV-2. Now, coming to this classification, which is basically, I will tell you the paper. So this was a series of 58 children published by Imperial College London, but it takes the children, various cases all over London. And what they found was, in PIMS TS, we have three categories. Everybody, can you mute yourself? Okay. So PIMS TS, we have three categories. One we all know, I think we all know this Kawasaki disease-like illness. The other one we all know is shock with myocardial dysfunction, which you call as a MISC or toxic shock syndrome-like features. Number three they found is some children presented with fever and inflammation. So isolated history of fever for more than 3 days, history of exposure to COVID-19, laboratory tests for hyperinflammation, but no cardiac involvement, no shock, no Kawasaki disease-like features, no organ involvement. I think what I was talking about, that case was fitting into fever with inflammation. Still, we do not have enough data about this, what to do with this, what not to do with this. But yes, this is a known entity. When I searched literature, I found that this is a known entity, that in these patients we don't have any such features of Kawasaki disease or shock, but they still show very high inflammatory markers. A big concern is that coronary artery aneurysms were found in all the three subsets. This I know. I will keep scanning for the coronary arteries, but this is one which is dangerous, and we still have to find out. And that is why they are recommending, Whitaker is recommending that we should do echo in every patient in all these three categories at 2, 4, and 6 weeks. So this was a very important study which gave the classification of PIMS-TS. Yes, the laboratory evidence of inflammation. So any patient who comes to you with fever, do all these inflammatory markers, especially CRP, D-dimer, ferritin. And if they are high, start thinking of PIMS-TS. Of course, with counts, you will have lymphopenia and neutrophilia. And this is also very important when you start diagnosing PIMS-TS. The other markers which may or may not be elevated is the child can have acute kidney injury, that is raised creatinine, coagulopathy. It has been seen that the inflammatory markers in these patients are high. If you do a IL-6, IL-10, they are high, and they have mild transaminitis, thrombocytopenia, and of course, when you have a cardiac involvement, what markers can you do is pro-BNP. What is BNP? It is a brain, is a basically, secreted by the heart, and it indicates inflammation of the heart. So whenever you have a pro-BNP, like you have dilated cardiomyopathy, or you have, in that cases, you will have a high pro-BNP, and it is a very important prognostic marker for the inflammation of the heart. So pro-BNP will be high. Troponin I, we all know troponin I, that will be high. And other things you have to go ahead is echo to find out LV dysfunction, myocarditis, or coronary artery abnormalities, and chest x-ray to find out whether there is any pericardial effusion, or you have any dilated heart or something like that. So
I just want to enter one thing here. Can we go back on the slide, please?
Yeah.
So here what we see is like we were also confused when to say that this problem, this patient, when to diagnose this is a dengue, or when to say this is a post-COVID syndrome with mild inflammation, or what we call as stage 1, when to call it as Kawasaki, or when to call it as that this patient is having missed type of involvement. Now we will be presenting all these three cases what came to us. We have already told you one case, and see how to differentiate whether this patient is dengue or whether this patient is post-COVID. Let's discuss this from this set of investigation what we have here. In dengue, most of the times, how we used to differentiate from dengue from a tropical fever. In dengue, you will get leukopenia, and you will get high ferritin. You will get high D dimers in dengue. See, D dimers is here I will say this D dimer, when it is present with dengue, it is of no use. You don't have to put this patient on anticoagulation. So you should remember this. In dengue, D dimers will be high. So don't decide whether this patient is dengue or post-COVID depending on your D dimers. So D dimer is of no role when we are treating a dengue. So how to differentiate between post-COVID and dengue? Post-COVID, you will get high CRP, whereas CRP in dengue will be rarely high. Second, in dengue, you will most of the time you will get lymphopenia, leukopenia, while in post-COVID, in most of the times, the first thing you will get is either in the leukocytosis, or even if there is no leukocytosis, you will get neutrophilia, like we used to see in COVID patients. The neutrophils are to the tune of 90%, and there is a relative lymphopenia. Same which you will see in cases of post-COVID syndrome also. You will get a lot of neutrophilia, and lymphopenia will be there. Third thing is, now again, ferritin we are commonly doing in all the patients. So ferritin is the acute phase reactant. We have seen it is high. It is very high in dengue. Supposedly, if a patient is sick with high-grade fever and you do ferritin in post-COVID syndrome, you will get ferritin less than 1000. While similarly, in these kind of patients, if patient is having dengue, the ferritin will be to the tune of more than 1000, 2000, 5000 to that level. So in post-COVID patients, ferritin was raised, but not very high, maybe 2 times, 3 times. But for dengue, ferritin was very high, more than 1000. So this is how we are differentiating these mild post-COVID syndromes who are just responding to steroids. D-dimers was high. D-dimer was high in dengue also, but if we have ruled out dengue by negative dengue antibody testing, by other features, and still the D-dimer is high, that means here we have to put these patients on anticoagulation. A post-COVID patient with high D-dimer means that he's up in pro-coagulant phase, and you have to treat this patient with anticoagulation. And now CRP was a one parameter which was like, it is not increasing too very much in dengue. So what we have seen is when all clinical parameters are fitting, you have excluded infection, you have excluded dengue, and you have a high CRP, you have a leukocytosis, lymphopenia, then we label these patients as post-COVID syndrome. So on day one, child not sick, high grade fever, 6-7 day, high count. Yes, you can keep this, can be post-COVID syndrome. You cannot keep on day one. You have to wait for 2-3 days. You have to follow the cultures. You have to get all other investigations done. Post-COVID syndrome. So this is how we differentiate between post-COVID and dengue. So now another feature was like how to use pro-BNP levels. So now what we will see in other two cases, how they were differentiating, how they were different from normal Kawasaki or classical Kawasaki, or how they were different from a patient who comes to us with septic shock and organ dysfunction, or who are coming to us in MISC and organ dysfunction. So here the pro-BNP was playing a very important role, because what we have seen is in post-COVID, primarily when the inflammation increases, it involves the coronaries and the heart and the myocardium. So now the pro-BNP states whenever the heart is working or it is under the stress, the stress of the heart is more, then the pro-BNP rises. Pro-BNP is basically it is the parameter which we do to say whether the illness is heavy, putting heart on strain or not. Any patient who are in congestive cardiac failure, they will be having a very high pro-BNP. The cardiologists use pro-BNP to differentiate whether the distress or whether the patient features are mainly because of the lung involvement or basically because of the heart involvement. If the pro-BNP is high, that means the patient is in failure. You have to restrict fluids, you have to augment the cardiac contractility. While if the pro-BNP is normal, that means the patient distress is mainly because of the bronchospasm, and you have to treat the lungs primarily. So this is how pro-BNP is being used. So whenever pro-BNP is high, that means heart is under strain. You have to increase the contractility of the heart. So here in these patients, what we have seen, BP was normal, patient was not in shock, but pro-BNP was very high. So, and even the patient was showing clinical features of patient was anxious, patient was lethargic, his peripheries were cold, but when we were checking the blood pressure, it was normal. Or patient was having a wide pulse pressure type of blood pressure, which we will discuss in coming cases. So pro-BNP is again was high to the tune of 5 times, 10 times. The normal value of pro-BNP is around 120. So here in these cases, who were going in Kawasaki syndrome or who were going in MISC type of presentation, the pro-BNP was 10 times high, 5 times high, not just mildly raised pro-BNP. Again, mildly raised pro-BNP of low value, and it can be raised in any mild illness also.
So I think we'll go ahead, and this was the basically investigations you should do when you have a patient with PIMS DS. So as I said, CBC with a differential, CRP, ferritin, and of course your inflammatory markers are ferritin, and your basically cardiac involvement is defined by the troponin and the pro-BNP, ECG, echo, and the chest X-ray. Of course, do not forget to do the bacterial cultures, viral swabs, and do not forget to do a COVID-19 PCR and a COVID-19 serology to rule out the other things. So let's go ahead and let's treat this case. So of course, milder cases with milder illness, they should be treated with antibiotics. And if the GI symptoms persist, you can add metronidazole. But in shocky-like states, of course, we have to give a wider coverage of antibiotics. And ultimately, once we get the cultures, we can discontinue all this. Coming to IVIG, So in all the three categories, be it Kawasaki-like disease, or be it shocky state, or be it fever with like, I don't know about fever with inflammation. We're still not very sure about the last category. But in the first two categories, we should give IVIG to all the patients, which is the drug of choice, and 2 grams per kilogram over 24 hours. The next question is, should we give it IVIG with or without steroids? So for that, we should consider that if the patient is a high risk patient, suppose the patient is come in a shocky state, macrophage activation syndrome with high grade fever, or having coronary artery dilatations, the recommendations say that you should give steroids along with it. If the IVIG fails, so if the patient doesn't respond to IVIG, do not retreat with IVIG, give steroids in that case. IVIG resistance scores, I will mention you, they are the Kobayashi scores. They can be used to assess the need of steroids. And if steroids and IVIG both fail, which has been seen in certain very few cases, people have tried anakinra, tocilizumab, and infliximab, again, because they all feel the cytokine storm, or you can say elevated level of cytokines is the problem in this case. This is the Kobayashi score, not going into very much detail, but once the score is more than 4, that means high CRP, percentage of neutrophils, platelet counts, etc., and age less than 12 months. That means the patient might be resistant to IVIG, so you should start steroids in that case. Aspirin, still we are learning about it, but what we have seen is that high dose aspirin, that is 30 to 50 milligram per kilogram, should be given for the first 48 hours, followed by the low dose, which is 3 to 5 milligram per kg per day for 4 to 6 weeks. Coming to low molecular weight heparin, we all give low, if the D dimers are positive, we give low molecular weight heparin for at least 2 weeks, even if the echo is normal. But if the D dimers are very high, that means more than 2000, they should be treated with the therapeutic doses of Flexane or low molecular weight heparin. And if the Z score, if there's a coronary artery aneurysm and the Z score is more than 10, the treatment doses should be given. Coming to steroids, so steroids, they have differentiated between mild, moderate, and severe cases. In the mild cases, that like our case was mild, so we gave him like 2 milligram per kilo per day of methylprednisolone. Later on, the child can be shifted to oral prednisolone. Now, for how long? This is still a gray area. What we were seeing in the last couple of days, there has been the talk on our PICU forum, which is all over India, that they have seen those people who tapered steroids over 3 weeks. They have found that the coronary artery dilatation has occurred at 4 to 6 weeks. So we still do not know, but we are giving, depending upon the inflammatory markers, for 3 to 6 weeks. In the moderate cases, so if the patient has come in shocky state or something like that, you can give a pulse dose of methylpred along with IVIG, or later on 10 milligram per kilo per day for 1 to 3 days, again followed by the low dose steroids over 3 to 6 weeks. For severe cases, pulse dose of 30 milligram per kilo per day for 1 to 3 doses, followed by oral steroids, which can be tapered over 6 to 8 weeks. So this is the recommendation for the steroids as of now. This duration is still the gray area, but this is definite that we have to give it for 6 to 8 weeks. So this was a paper published by Mumbai, which has been the first hit by the COVID as well as post-COVID. And they saw that the coronary artery dilatation was found in 26% patients, and steroids was used in most patients, which is 96%, and IVIG in 65%. Outcomes have been good in post-COVID syndrome all over the world. I think 2 deaths, as far as I know, in Europe, and 1 or 2 deaths in India, but there have been some ECMO cases as well. So this was just the categorization of PIMS-CS, Kawasaki-like disease. You can say the toxic shock syndrome, and fever with inflammatory state, where we do not know what to be done. But here, as I said, if there is you give IVIG and high dose steroid, high dose aspirin followed by low dose aspirin. If the patient is in shock, you can give methylpred 2 milligram per kilo per day, add to 10 milligram per kilo per day. In toxic shock, it is always better to start steroids along with IVIG, and in resistant cases, you can give anakinra and tocilizumab. So this was my paper from the ESMIC Society, and we've also mentioned the same thing, that IVIG and steroids is the drug of choice in both the cases, along with aspirin. But if there is a resistant cases, we have to give tocilizumab, anakinra. So far, so good. We haven't had such cases that we have to use such treatment. So coming to my cases, which is the second case of this grand rounds, and this was more or less a clear-cut case, or you can say my first case of COVID-19 post-COVID here. So this was a 9-year-old male child brought to us from Jammu, who had COVID-19 15 days back. The father is a doctor, and he said that he had COVID, and later on his child was tested COVID positive. For the first 5 days, he had just low grade fever, and from the fifth day onwards, he started having high fever. And last 3 days, his fever has been very, very high, and he got multiple courses of antibiotics during this duration. And one important thing the father mentioned was that there has been a conjunctival congestion or his redness in his eyes, which started 2 days ago. When I examined him, I found that his oral mucosa was red. There's inflammation of hands and feet and his face, of course, and there was conjunctival congestion. So this led me to think that maybe I am dealing with post-COVID syndrome or Kawasaki disease-like features. This patient had high fever, but there were no signs of shock. So I investigated him, and the first day his counts were 20,000, and with, you can say there was neutrophilia. His CRP was 199, and his ferritin was 230. So one thing we have seen is the ferritins are up to the tune of 600 or maximum 500-600, not more than that in post-COVID syndrome. Whereas CRPs, they have been very, very high, 200, 300, like that. So I did a D-dimer, which was positive, and pro-BNP, which was again 569, which is high. And did a dengue, of course, I did, which was negative. PCR was negative, and his blood cultures were all sterile. Dr. Navdeep did an echo and they found hyperemia of the coronaries. Now, this has been the most common finding in Kawasaki disease-like illness post-COVID. That means your coronaries look a bit shiny, but there is no dilatation. And I was, of course, worried because he came on 15th day of illness. His CT chest was normal. I did his antibodies later on from OPD, which were positive. So coming to the course, of course, we thought that it is PIMS TS, Kawasaki disease-like illness, because he had this Kawasaki disease-like features with high inflammatory markers, which led me to think that, okay, we are dealing with this. We gave him IVIG, 2 grams per kilogram, along with high-dose steroids. His fever, subsided. But after 48 hours of stopping IVIG, he again started spiking high-grade fevers. He developed all this conjunctival congestion, oral mucosa red. And I did Kobayashi score in this case, and it was more than 4. So I started him on methylpred 2 milligram per kilo per day for 3 days. His fever completely subsided, his inflammatory markers reduced, and that is the time I discharged him. We did an echo before discharge. There was no coronary artery dilatation. So this patient just came yesterday. It has been over 6 weeks. His steroids have been tapered. I gave him full dose steroids for 4 weeks. As I said, that there has been a talk that people who stop steroids at 3 to 4 weeks, they develop coronary artery dilatation later on. So I had word with the parents. They were okay with that. So tapered steroids over 6 weeks. And now his last counts were normal. CRP is negative. D-dimer is negative. Ferritin is 37. And aspirin has been given for 6 weeks. Echo is normal in this case. So this was a classical case of PIMS TS, Kawasaki disease-like illness. Coming to another case, which was the case 3, Jasmine, who presented to us in the hospital with high-grade fever for 6 days. She had cough, body ache, and vomiting. So the first thing is, we thought might be, but this was referred to us by our dear Lekisa, and we did a COVID antibody from outside. If she was admitted outside for 2 days, and with that, despite her antibiotics or despite everything, his dengue were negative, everything was negative, the cultures were all negative, and we were still, she was not well. And when we had the family history, the family had a history of fever in the family about a month back. So we were sent with the antibody report positive, because when it was discussed with us, we said, let's get an antibody report. And it was positive, and she came to us with when we found that she had mild oral erythema and mild conjunctival congestion. Not all classical features of Kawasaki were not there. We just had few features, just one or two features of Kawasaki, and the patient was in shocky state. So we did have counts. Counts were high neutrophilic predominance, CRP 396, and the ferritin was again high to the tune of 381. D dimers were positive, 850. You can see the pro BNP in this case was very high. It was 18,000, whatever. And basically, COVID PCR negative, dengue negative, and again, the hyperemia of the coronaries, but the function was normal, and COVID antibodies outside were positive. So, this was another case we treated with sort of, you can say, the mist-like picture. So it fitted into all the WHO criteria for Kawasaki disease or the mist syndrome. And we proceeded with this child, gave her IVIG 2 gram per kilogram with high dose aspirin for 48 hours. And this time we were wiser. So and the fever had not settled in this patient despite IVIG. So we started her on methylprednisolone 2 milligram per kilo per day for 3 days, after which her fever gradually settled. Her shock, she basically was in shock, and we gave her norepinephrine and hemodynamic support. Inflammatory markers reduced, and she basically, coronaries remained normal in this child. So we discharged her on prednisolone, aspirin, and Clexane, which we gave for 2 weeks. Coming to the same thing which Dr. Vikas was talking about, and how do we differentiate a case of dengue with post-COVID syndrome? Now, as you can see, fever is present in both. Cardiac dysfunction may not be present in, but you can say that the cardiac dysfunction in shocky state is more in case you can. The other thing which we basically found was CRP was very, very high. There was neutrophilia and lymphopenia with high counts in post-COVID, which is not the case in dengue. And ferritin, you can say they were high up to the tune of 600, 800, but usually when you have a dengue sick patient, they're usually in thousands. D-dimer is not helpful in dengue. It has no role. It will always be positive. You don't have to treat it. But if you get a pro-BNP, it's usually higher in case of post-COVID. And of course, you have to do an echo to rule out any aneurysms or any hyperemia of the coronaries. The questions and the gray areas which are still to be answered after my talk, because we are still learning along with you all in post-COVID. What the one thing which I don't know about is this febrile patient with inflammation. So what has to be done? Steroids, how long? Do I have to give aspirin? Do I have to give a coronary check in all these patients? Of course, with the current evidence, it says that you have to do a coronary check in all these patients up to 6 weeks. What is the duration of steroids? Why some children develop PIMS TS, some not? Environmental, genetic, or any other risk factors? What is the long-term outcome in these children, and who all will develop coronary complications 1 year down the lane? It is still a gray area, and the role of anakinra and tocilizumab and infliximab. So with that, thank you so much for a patient listening. I think I'll open the this thing for session, and happy Diwali. I think Dr. Vikas will further, give his inputs on this case.
So I think we are open for discussion now. We tried to make the picture clear that whether how to differentiate between post-COVID and between dengue and between tropical fever. So we had certain issues that day one, if the patient is not sick, only high-grade fever with high counts, try to rule out other things rather than jumping to say that this is post-COVID. Try to find out antibodies or RT-PCR positive or a positive contact history, and if the CRP is high, neutrophilia is there, lymphopenia is there, ferritin is not very high, then it is post-COVID probably. And if the D dimer is high during post-COVID, then you have to put these patients on anticoagulation also. But similarly, dengue, we all know lymphopenia, oral leukopenia, very high ferritin levels. The D dimer will be high in dengue. So positive D dimer in dengue doesn't mean that you have to put these patients on anticoagulation. So the treatment part, how it is different. For dengue, we all know hyperferritinemia. If it is there, then we have to treat it with steroids along with when we start steroids. Not all hyperferritinemia and dengue requires steroids. What we have kept a cutoff value for this is if any patient who comes to us with a shocky state or required fluid resuscitation or high fluid rate is required beyond 2 to 3 hours, then we put them on steroids. So many of our friends were discussing with us that they are getting routinely very high ferritin levels on in dengue patients who are being treated on OPD basis, otherwise hemodynamically stable. So we kept on saying to them, if the patient is hemodynamically stable, then don't use steroids. This is a short pro-inflammatory state, and it will. We all know that within 5 to 7 days it will subside by itself. But yes, if it is creating any organ dysfunction, or if it is leading to either hypotensive shock or compensated shock, then definitely you can put them on steroids. One more thing we have seen that post-COVID syndrome again. One should not overdiagnose it. Post-COVID syndrome overdiagnosis is not good, so we should not jump to say that this is post-COVID syndrome. But once the patient is sick, one should keep this diagnosis in mind, considering that this can be post-COVID, because the differentiating points are still very relative, and there is no clear-cut differentiation between the sick dengue, sick tropical fever, or sick COVID. Now I'll take questions which has been given in chat. This one question: if we don't have the pro-BNP in our setup, only echo, how much we are near to PRIMS TS diagnosis? So how frequently we need to monitor the child after discharge, after looking at echo changes in the arteries? So again, you have asked about the gray areas. If you don't have pro-BNP, so pro-BNP is like, you can say that what I will see, how I will use pro-BNP. Once I get a Kawasaki type of picture, then even classical Kawasaki and this Kawasaki along with post-COVID have a similar diagnosis, have a similar treatment. Only thing is that if the patient is having fever even after giving IVIG, then you have to put these patients on steroids. You don't have to repeat IVIG in this patient. And the one good thing is that post-COVID Kawasaki type of syndrome is not associated with a lot of aneurysms or coronary dilatations, as has been seen worldwide. Now, secondly, how to follow them. Initially, when we don't know what is going to happen, we should counsel the family that yes, echo has to be done after every 4 to 6 weeks. You have to take cardiologist in the picture, and you, from your side, you have to investigate them, because we don't know what will be the course in them. If we don't do this and the patient develops some complication, then the onus will be on us, that why we have not counseled them for proper follow-up. So another question is from Dr. Gurdeep Singh Dhulia. He said that severe dengue, you are having hematocrit more than 40. Don't forget to do echo in shock patients. Yes, that is right. Functional echoes are very important. Any patient who comes to us with shock nowadays in all tertiary care centers, I think without bedside echocardiography or bedside ultrasonography, we find it very difficult to manage cases nowadays. To titrate therapy towards the end organs, bedside ultrasonography and functional echocardiography is very, very important. And you know what will be the baseline hematocrit? We don't know, because generally we see the sick dengue are the adolescent ones who are in the age of 10, 11, 12 years. Generally, these patients, they are not anemic. Their baseline hemoglobin is tuned to the tune of 12, 13, 14. So they can have a basic hematocrit of 40. So for smaller children of around 4 or 5 years of age, where we see that the hemoglobin is in the range of around 10, 10.5, 11. Here the baseline hematocrit is somewhere around 33, 35. So that's how we target our therapy. Second thing, what we have seen in dengue is, once you have platelets start rising in dengue, then I don't think so that there is much to monitor your hematocrit values. Once the platelets start rising, then the hematocrit will fall in place within the next 2 to 3 days. If the patient is in volume overload, there is a lot of pleural effusion, lot of pulmonary edema, lot of ascites, then you can safely start with low dose diuretics and gradually you can build it up, creating a negative balance depending on the age and weight of the patient. So that's how we can monitor our ourselves as per the this dengue one. So another thing, one is kids with dengue and COVID co-infection. So there, yes, this question was again raised many times. So patient with sick dengue, and nowadays because COVID is in the fashion, so we are getting COVID antibodies done. So how to interpret it? Whether any COVID co-infection or past infection with dengue is leading to a severe illness, I don't know. But what my view in this is, if your patient is primarily dengue, behaving like dengue, please treat dengue. Forget about COVID. So if your patient is not fitting into the PIMS TS or MIS criteria, please don't put COVID into the picture. If your patient is having leukopenia, high ferritin values, a shocky state, cool peripheries, typical presentation of a dengue shock syndrome, please treat dengue shock syndrome. Nothing is there to treat COVID. Yes, in dengue shock syndrome, we are giving steroids. There is no take back point in that. We are using steroids in these patients, so that's why for PIMS TS, we are also using steroids. There is no need to give IVIG here. IVIG has only been given once we are sure that this patient is not sick dengue only, and we have already enumerated certain points like counts being very high, high CRP values, pro-BNP being very high. These are the patients where you consider after having good discussion among ourselves that yes, whether this patient will be benefiting from IVIG or not. So there are no consensus statements still yet that how COVID co-infection along with dengue they will present. But we know that now the incidence of COVID was very high. Antibodies coming in almost every patient positive who are falling sick. Whether they are having post-COVID along with certain other features like dengue, or whether there's only dengue who severe dengue, we don't know how to interpret it. But definitely, what we have seen is we never used IVIG in these patients where there is no mixed picture was present, and we found good results in all these cases. Any other question? We are open to discussion.
Dr. Dhuri is asking about role of steroids in dengue fever. So, when we have high ferritins and a shocky-like state in dengue, we do ferritin in every patient with dengue who lands up in our ICU. And if the ferritin is high to the tune of more than 1,000, we start low dose steroids in these patients, and we have seen drastic improvement in terms of shortening the hospital stay, less shock resolves better, and the thrombocytopenia resolves in a faster way. So yes, we are doing this using steroids when we have high ferritins or of course HLH like picture in dengue. Any other questions? We are all open. I think we are still learning about post-COVID, but yes, it's always good to have any discussion or any queries in our mind regarding this, because I think we must be seeing something or the other in our OPDs as well, but just differentiating all these fevers have become a really messy state of affairs.
So I think with this we end today's webinar. Hope you have liked what we presented today. We tried to clear here on certain gray areas that how we do it. We are not saying that what we are doing is the best thing. We are asking for inputs from everyone. We are constantly reviewing the literature, and whatever the literature says, we are trying to follow what is best written over there. So with this, I think we end this today's session. We wish you very happy and safe Diwali. Enjoy with your family. It's festival time, so have a good day and have a very happy Diwali. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.